Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Student Spotlight Series, where we showcase some of the work our past students have done. Today, it is our pleasure to have with us Morgan Synn. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what year of school you're in, and about the course you've taken with CCIR?
Hi, my name is Morgan, and I'm currently a junior at a boarding school in Connecticut. The course I took was titled Neuroscience and Neurotechnology, Understanding and Enhancing the Human Mind. It mainly focused on understanding the nervous system from an overall and cellular standpoint, and then extending that understanding towards looking at how neurotechnology can aid in different conditions, such as deafness or Parkinson's.
Mm-hmm. So can you say a little bit about the research project that you did with this program?
I conducted research on the alpha spectral power in the frontal and parietal lobes of Alzheimer's individuals and compared them to healthy controls. So this essentially took the EEGs, which are electroencephalograms. They're the recordings of brainwaves taken via scalp electrodes on the patient's head. And then we can translate those brainwaves into using them as like biomarkers to understand how they're different from controls and potentially uncovering more quantitative metrics that can be used even in like diagnosis or even just distinguishing between the two groups.
Mm-hmm.
So I basically found that there was a statistically significant reduction in alpha spectral power in Alzheimer's individuals compared to healthy controls. And they also had a increased frontal to parietal ratio, which indicated a varying or skewed sort of spectral power dynamic in the Alzheimer's patients compared to controls.
I see. So is there a causal mechanism that's understood here, or are we just looking at sort of correlations?
Yeah, that was part of what I also delved into in like my discussion section. It was really interesting to me because alpha waves are one of the higher frequency brain waves that can be recorded in EEGs. And higher frequency activities like alpha are more correlated with awakeness, consciousness, and focus and attentiveness,
Mhm.
whereas something like of a lower frequency like delta is more correlated with deep sleep or unconsciousness. And the fact that these Alzheimer's patients experienced that decrease in alpha spectral power indicated to me that that could potentially be a quantitative hint of cognitive decline because they're like less able to focus, less attentive, and things like that, and have a decreased presence of those waves just in their day-to-day life. So I found that really interesting.
Yeah, that is really fascinating. I feel like there's something intuitively sensible about that. So can you say a little bit about what your methodology was? Or was it sort of a literature review or a meta-analysis? Or
I did original research at CCIR, so that entailed I found an open data set on OpenNeuro, and I was able to plug that data into a MATLAB, which is a programming software that allows for higher level data analysis. It's also
Hmm.
really useful because it had EEG specific extensions. So I was able to plug the data in, pre-process it, filter it, all that, and then extract these specific spectral power metrics that I was interested in looking at, and then conduct statistical testing on how significant the presence of specific activities were.
I see. So was there existing literature that sort of delved into this relationship that you were engaged with? Or I guess, well, how did this fit into the kind of existing body of research about Alzheimer's?
Yeah, there was definitely some existing research beforehand. It looked at a lot of different waves, so not just alpha, but it the few studies that did look into alpha specifically did find a reduction. So my literature made sense with the pre-existing literature, but the studies tended to look at more on an overall scale. And I was really interested in looking at specifically the frontal and parietal activity because those are really core in things like decision making, attentiveness, focus, and memory. And those things are often things that Alzheimer's patients report having some challenges with. So I wanted
Mhm.
to see if there was a specific sort of noticeable biomarker or variation in Alzheimer's patients compared to healthy controls in those regards in this region.
I see. So I'm definitely not very educated in the subject area. So you have to forgive me if this isn't a good question. But am I understanding correctly then that you're sort of dealing with two different factors? There's, I guess, the like you mentioned studying specific areas of the brain, right? And then you also talk about alpha brain waves. Are these two separate sort of metrics that you're looking at, or are they somehow more closely tied together?
They are definitely two different factors I'm interested in, but they kind of coincide in that I was looking at the alpha waves in those areas.
I see.
So it's like when you could take an EEG, it's taking the collective like noise in someone's head or like the collective brain waves. But by using MATLAB, I was able to filter out the other frequency ranges and only focus on the alpha frequency band, which is from 8 to 12 hertz.
Mhm.
So by looking at that specific wave, it kind of unified the data. So it's a little less two
I
different
see.
factors.
So you can measure the alpha brainwave activity in specific parts of the brain.
Mhm.
I see. I didn't know. I didn't know. That's really interesting. So you mentioned a bit about sort of your discussion section, right? Can you say a little bit more about, I guess, what your overall conclusions were, what your big takeaways were, or maybe where you see room for further research?
My big takeaway was that statistically significant reduction in the alpha power in Alzheimer's patients compared to healthy controls, and the fact that they experienced an increased frontal to parietal ratio,
Mhm.
meaning like the ratio of the alpha power in the frontal area was greater than the amount in the parietal area. And those, to me, could be explored as further explored in the future as biomarkers specifically for diagnosis, because oftentimes a lot of the ways that Alzheimer's is diagnosed currently is through psychological tests. And
Mhm.
while those are pretty effective for current needs, it's a little bit less nuanced or less specific. So it
Mhm.
doesn't really tell you anything about how far it's progressed, or like it's not precise. It's not a quantitative metric.
Mhm.
So I wanted part of the reason why I pursued this path was because I wanted to find something more quantitative and something that you could potentially look at and see, oh, it's at this particular millivolts of alpha presence, so it might be this far into the condition. So you can kind of gain more insights through those quantitative biometrics.
Mhm.
So that's something that I hope to be able to continue contributing to as a growing field, especially to increase the presence of neurotechnology in current clinical usages.
Mhm. Yeah, that definitely sounds really promising. So in the study that you already did, were you able to see sort of a clear quantitative relationship between, I guess, the extent of the progression of Alzheimer's and, I guess, the alpha brainwave activity that you were measuring?
Yeah, there was a really strong correlation between that statistical reduction of alpha presence and the skew power ratio.
Mhm.
And both of those I was able to test via statistical tests. So I was able to find the p-value of those specific behaviors. And then both of those told me that the data was very statistically significant. I believe the value was 0.05 for like whether or not the null hypothesis can be rejected. And all of my p-values were around like 0.005 or below. So it was very
Yeah,
significant.
that is very significant. So is this a metric that can be easily compared across different patients? Or is it sort of, does each patient have to sort of set their own baseline for measuring, I guess, what the healthy or appropriate amount of activity is?
So EEGs can be taken for anyone. There's like a standardized placement of electrodes that kind of makes it standard no matter like things like your head shape or like how big your head is, things like that. So those are used to standardly record the activity. And once you take the recording, which is taken under specific conditions, it's I believe your eyes are closed, you're sitting, and you're just very relaxed. You're not thinking of anything. So it's very baseline. It was the resting state conditions.
Mm.
And in taking those, you're able to get the collective brainwave activity, as we've talked about a little bit. And
Mhm.
then it's really easy to just isolate the specific frequency band that you want to look at. So it's very standardizable. And that's one thing I really appreciate about EEGs, because some
Mhm.
neurotechnology is a lot more complex and it's like invasive, meaning you require like surgery or you're digging deeper into your brain tissue, which always has some complications and some risks. But I
Mhm.
really appreciated how EEGs were more like surface level, but they still provided a picture into the patient's neurological activity. So it's non-invasive and it's also very standardizable across patients.
Mhm. Yeah, that definitely seems makes it seem like this would be like very easy to apply clinically, as opposed to maybe other technologies that would be more invasive. But I guess I think my question was something like, is this as far as sort of as a diagnostic tool, on the basis of a single measurement of one patient, could you sort of come to some conclusion about whether they're at risk of or potentially have Alzheimer's, or is it that you'd have to observe a change over time in a single patient?
I think there's definitely some promise in like it's like a singular value. So you can see the amount of absolute spectral power, which is the specific measurement that I looked at in my research.
Mhm.
And there was a specific range of the power in millivolts that was present in the Alzheimer's individuals compared to the healthy controls. But there is
Mhm.
definitely still some overlap, so there's still some more research to be done. But it's a very promising avenue considering the significance, and there is a very like wide variety of difference comparing the two groups.
Yeah, cool. That's really good to know. So, yeah, that definitely seems like it would be extremely promising. Do you have plans to publish the paper or take it to conferences?
Yes, I do. I've received help from the CCIR academics team who helped me to provide me with some revisions and things like that. And I've also worked with both my mentors who were able to look over my work throughout the duration of the course. And I'm planning on hopefully submitting to the International Journal of High School Research.
Mhm.
And I'm really excited to potentially bring my work and share it with the broader scientific community.
That's great. Yeah, this seems like a really impressive and successful project. So definitely glad that you're able to share it. Um, so I guess going back maybe a bit to sort of your experience with the course, how did you find, like, was this your first experience doing original research, or did you already have some experience coming in?
It was my first time doing original research, so that was part of what sort of made me a bit nervous initially going into the course because I knew I wanted to produce original research because I've done review work in the past and I wanted to sort of push myself outside my comfort zone and like really maximize my experience from the course.
Mhm.
And being able to produce that type of original research that I knew I wanted to in like the limited time frame of the course, and also the fact that I'd never used MATLAB before. I had like not really coded before either.
Mhm.
So I was really just trying to challenge myself throughout the course. And
Mhm.
it was so rewarding when I was able to see those final findings and when everything worked out in MATLAB. And I had a very positive experience overall with that regard.
Mhm. So can you say a little bit about maybe the support that you received from your instructor or TA during the process?
Yeah, both my mentors were very, very supportive for me throughout the program, whether it was in like the teaching aspect of the course, like the more lecture-oriented things. They were always really open to receiving questions and like deepening my own understanding of the lecture material. And in the later half of the course, they also were super helpful in that process of me learning how to use MATLAB. We scheduled a lot of like individual office hours for me to like ask them questions and get through roadblocks. So they were very, very supportive and also part of the reason why I sort of felt comfortable in continuing to challenge myself, because I knew I was able to have their guidance and they were very, very helpful for me.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it seems like there were sort of a lot of different new skills that you maybe picked up I guess, over the course of this project. So having that kind of one-on-one guidance, I think, is really essential for that. Was there any part of the process that you found especially challenging or surprising?
I think obviously learning how to use MATLAB was the most challenging thing for me. It was like many hours of like the office hours, the like reading through tutorials on my own and reading articles on my own. It was a lot of work, sort of like learning how to navigate that software. I think also learning how to like take the actual data and like sort of project it onto like a more like general public was sort of challenging for me because taking that information that I had gained from my findings from the data set, like, oh, there was a reduction of alpha spectral power, and understanding how that can be projected onto just a general demographic of Alzheimer's patients and sort of writing about that in my discussion. That was also more challenging than I thought because it was like required me to interpret the biomarkers and what that reduction meant specifically, like on a biological level.
So if you were to give advice to someone who is preparing to do a program like this, also maybe with little or no research experience, what advice would you give them? Or is there, what do you wish maybe that you had known coming into the program?
I think my biggest advice would be to just really soak it all in because CCIR is such a resource dense experience, or I felt that way definitely. And whether it's like the MATLAB license that I got, or the access to journal articles, or my mentors being willing to have extra time with me. So it's such a like space filled with resources and opportunities. And the way I maximized that was by just entering the course with a mindset of challenging myself and being ready to grow and open to feeling uncomfortable in new experiences. So I think my biggest advice would be to just really make use of every single opportunity and throughout those 13 weeks.
And do you feel like the program has prepared you to continue doing original research in the future, or made you feel more confident or sure that that's a path that you want to go down?
I definitely think so. I was really grateful to have this experience because I really think I grew as a student and as a researcher through the program. And like exploring neurotechnology, which is a more computational or like biological end of neuroscience, I was really surprised and really excited when I genuinely found a deeper interest in it because I originally kind of started in the more behavioral, cognitive, psychological end of neuroscience. So when I found that I actually had an interest in that, that was something I could see myself doing in my university or even in my career. That was something I was really like happy that I had that experience. So it's definitely prepared me to do research in the future and made me more excited for any future endeavors.
That's great. I'm really glad to hear that. So do you have any final thoughts maybe that you'd like to share about your experience?
I think it's CCR was just a great place for growth, and really the way to thrive is by maximizing like every second of it. And I'm really proud of the work that I've done, and every single like challenge has just made it more rewarding in the end. So I was really, really grateful for all the support I received, whether it was from my mentors or from like the CCR academics team.
Yeah, I mean, just hearing about your project, it really does sound like it was a big success. So definitely, it seems like challenging yourself paid off. I was really interested to hear about your research, and I'm sure that many other people will be too, once you're able to publish it. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing about your experience. And I really enjoyed talking to you and hearing about your work.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate your time.